Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. Let's get started today. We'll consult my cyber crystal ball. So this is a look at what 2022 will hold. All right. So we're going to start off with Lori Sussman. Lori, you want to come on and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm kind of a non-traditional academic. If you kind of look at my background, I started as one of the first women to graduate from West Point, and I went into the United States Army Signal Corps and did a lot of information security before it had a cool cybersecurity name. When I retired in 2007 as a full colonel, I spent a lot of time including command positions, also in areas like the White House, the Joint IED Defeat Organization. I worked directly for the Chief of Staff of the Army on a lot of issues dealing with cybersecurity and information security. Then I started going into the public sector, the private sector rather, at companies big and small, companies like Cisco and HPE, and even small companies like a small VAR in South Carolina, E-Group, and I had my own company. That's where I learned that big companies have politics, little companies have drama. You know, there's this really great book called Halftime, and it's about exchanging success for significance. And so after feeling pretty successful in the 24 years in the Army and 10 years in the private sector, I went and got my doctorate at the University of New England and have been really excited to do a lot of research in cybersecurity education, training, and awareness to kind of demystify and help people in vulnerable populations. So that's been the thrust of what I've been doing at the University of Southern Maine, where I've been for the last 4 years and really having a great time. So thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Lori is one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. She shares a lot of amazing articles and a lot of good commentary on it, and also helped me get through my first instance of imposter syndrome, which I know probably resonates with a few of you that are on this call. She invited me to speak on a panel at the University of Southern Maine with the CISO of the entire University of Maine system, a Secret Service cybercrimes agent, and myself. So I felt like about this big, but I had tons of great questions from all of the students, and it was just a really amazing local experience. And just as Antoinette said, Lori is a true cyber OG and is making a huge difference in one of the topics that we are going to talk about, and that is the cyber gap, the talent gap, I should say. Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Lori. We appreciate you. And Curtis, you are up next.
I was wondering what you were going to put up there for me.
That's Jim, that's not me.
I'm humbled to be in the presence of you guys. It's an honor. My background, I've been like Lori, I was doing some version of what is now cybersecurity well before it had a label or a career attached to it. I was chasing bad guys and routers in the 90s. I built internet companies and then eventually ended up working for SBC, which is now AT&T, for years, where I was a 5-state SME, if you guys remember the Ameritech region, doing security architectures in a 5-state region for them. And then after that, I decided to go, I like your phrase about the big company politics and the little company drama. I decided to go for drama, and I switched to startups for a while, and I did some security startups. One was acquired by Citrix, the other one was acquired by Trustwave. And the third one, before I made this questionable life choice to start a company, was Fortinet. And Fortinet, I was there through the IPO. I managed their service provider program there. So probably the first half of my career, you could call me an operator. I was hands-on. I did pen testing. I did architecture. I did installations. And I chased bad guys. In the second half, somebody tricked me into becoming a business development person. I don't know if it's because I had the right wardrobe or what it was, but anyway, it paid better. And then about 8 years ago, I started working on the project that is now GroupSense. The mission has obviously evolved over 8 years. We were very early in this particular market, the digital risk protection space. About 2 years ago, I guess maybe a little less than that, we got involved in a number of very large, high-profile ransomware incidents, where we became, is a longer story than I can tell you now, but we became the de facto liaison between the victims, which were typically very large Fortune 500 publicly traded companies, and the ransomware operators. And that sort of snowballed into a practice, which we're now recognized as one of the top ransomware responders in the world. And I am particularly known for the negotiation component, although there's a lot more to the response component than that. I think that sums it up, but thanks for having me.
Everybody knows you as the go-to ransomware negotiator, but your company does do quite a bit more than that. But I'm dying to know, how are your Slavic languages?
Well, actually, my girlfriend is from that region, so it's actually better than you would expect. But we also have on our team a team of intelligence analysts that speak some 15 native languages. So we have a lot of support there.
Wow. I was just curious if that was a requirement to get into ransomware negotiation, because I've read a lot of Chris Voss books. So I was thinking maybe, you know.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring Mr. Voss up, but he has also gotten, he's gotten in touch with me, and we've collaborated a little bit as well.
Nice. I was actually just listening on the car today to one of the newer episodes of the Jordan Harbinger show, and they were talking about, releasing, or searching for missing people and, ransoms of people in the Middle East. So very interesting, very, very relevant all around. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here, Curtis. I'm sure people will have quite a few questions for you. And Antoinette, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right, talk about being humbled and kind of which one of these don't belong. So I don't even know how I'm going to follow both of these acts, but I will just be me and tell you my story, which is pretty much the polar opposite of both of your stories, in that I spent 21 years in the physical security industry. I'm one of the rare people in physical security that are there by design. I have my bachelor's degree in managing security systems. And when I graduated back in the late 90s, the chairperson had the foresight to realize that physical security and IP, we called it back then, were going to merge. So he had suggested that I go get some computer training. So I went and got my MCSE back when Windows NT was the OS of choice. That's just, how you kind of have an idea of how old I am. And he also gave me some great advice where he said, there are software people and there are hardware people, but very few people do both. So I simultaneously got my A+ certification, and I learned, how to take computers apart and do some forensic stuff back in the day when things were a lot less complicated as they are now. And I got my first job in the physical security industry as a technician. So as architecting systems, because nobody in physical security understood what an IP address was, or, how to set up a switch or anything like that. So I spent a lot of time through that first phase of convergence, if you will, in physical security, where we went from analog encoding devices and then eventually IP cameras and access control devices and perimeter protection. I was about 6 months pregnant with my first son on a ladder at the Statue of Liberty, installing some cameras and wireless access points. And one of the National Park Service guys said, hey, you should probably do something else because the tool belt doesn't fit anymore. So I hung up my tool belt, and Curtis, like you, I kind of got roped into operations and sales. And I think it's because there aren't that many female techs, and I kind of didn't fit the role, the mold anymore. But it actually, being a technician and being in the field and understanding how to build systems really gave me the ability to be a trusted advisor in the sales business development role. And so I never really saw myself as a salesperson, but I was always a problem solver. And yes, Curtis, there's far more money in solving those problems than there are building systems. So fast forward a few years, and I got called by a manufacturer, Access Communications. They invented the IP camera, and they're a fantastic company based out of Sweden. And I worked there for 4.5 years. And as I was working with enterprise global end customers, I realized that there was this tremendous gap of knowledge within the physical security industry on securing endpoint devices. So our answer to security when it came to network security was microsegmentation. We invented, a shadow IT, basically. We didn't want to deal with the IT people because they were the roadblock. So we just built our own network. It's fine. So now we created this 3-decade-old problem, and we have to figure out a way to undo some of these thought processes. And so I went back to school, got my master's degree in cyber policy and risk analysis, and started really, when I started scratching the surface of cybersecurity, I started seeing things that I couldn't unsee, and really started recognizing how operational technology is kind of the gaping wound, for all businesses in terms of securing their networks. And it creates the biggest vulnerabilities for most organizations because, as my esteemed colleagues have said, they've been doing this since the 90s, right, for network security. But now you're adding in all of these other attack surfaces, and it's just created a major problem. So as far as I'm concerned, it's no longer nation state versus nation state, it's nation state versus citizens, because we're the access into companies. And in addition to that, similar to Lori, I have an affinity for teaching young people about the importance of cyber hygiene. And one of the things that, from a philanthropic standpoint, that I like to do is work with K through 12 and talk to young people about the importance of data privacy and cyberbullying and clickbait and how organizations make money on their data. Because I think that if we take the time to educate young people, since we're giving them the tools and access anyway to the information, we're actually building stronger people for future workforce. So that's me in a nutshell. And I'm super excited to have these conversations, and all of us are equally passionate about this topic. So let's just get into it.
I love this. I'm so excited. As you can see, I love to, tout the cybersecurity all over the place. So I'm working on a collection of cybersecurity t-shirts because people say, what's 2FA? And I'm like, I'm glad you asked, lady on the airplane. Let's talk. All right, so we're going to start off with a quick 2021 look back. So one of the things I want to ask our panelists is, what was the craziest cyber thing of 2021 that sticks out in your mind when you're looking back? And Antoinette, we'll start with you.
I mean, there are so many to choose from, right? So ransomware obviously is the big one, but the fact that we got hit in our national, power grid, we've gotten hit in the water supply, we got hit in food supply. For me, that was telling, right? It was no longer just, we're going to go after big companies for data and to make money in ransomware, but they're actually hitting the things that hurt communities the most. So for me, it was just recognizing those vulnerabilities in the things that mean the most to keep society running. It was pretty scary.
Absolutely. Curtis, what about you? What sticks out to you as the thing of 2021?
Well, I think maybe it's something that isn't obvious to everybody is a good thing to mention, and that is the number of small businesses that got hit that nobody heard about. So, when we started doing the ransomware cases, when we originally started doing it, all of the cases were brought to us by like either cyber breach law firms or incident responders. And then when we eventually somewhat reluctantly advertised that we did it on our website, a whole new set of victims started showing up at our doorstep, and we recognized that for every colonial pipeline, there's 1,000 businesses on Main Street that get hit that we don't hear about. They either go out of business or they pay a ransom that is materially harmful to their business. People lose their jobs. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that nobody's talking about.
Absolutely. I feel like, having started with Defendify about 3 years ago, it was really like pushing a rock uphill as far as the education component. But now I think between some news coverage and local, press and people actually talking about it, nobody's going to sit in their BNI group and be like, oh, woof, got a ransomware attack the other day. Let me tell you about that. But it is starting to be talked about a little bit more in some of the stigma.
Like other, let's say, pandemics, if you will, the likelihood that a small business owner now knows another small business owner who has been hit is much higher. And so it becomes more and more real.
In my chiropractor appointment the other day, my chiropractor said, oh yeah, ransomware. We had a ransomware incident a couple years ago. So, and we were talking about, some of the changes, which we're going to talk about on the next slide as well. So, Lori, what jumps out to you from 2021?
I think for me, it's just how, SHTF kinds of, major events, stuff that hits the fan kind of events became an attack vector. As soon as there was some bad thing happening, it was immediately an attack vector. I think that the most horrifying one was when that condo fell, before they had the names out of all the people who were impacted, there was already identity theft. And so the fact that the criminal elements are looking at major horrible events as attack vectors is getting more and more problematic.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, we've seen it in so many different stages in the progression through the pandemic, and how all of that information, whether it was, there's a new case reported in your area, and, the exposure tracking, to PPP scams and vaccine information, and people being like, one of the most heartbreaking social engineering ones that I saw was an email that went out to an entire nursing staff on their personal email addresses saying that they had been terminated, and to open this attachment to find out about their benefits and severance package and things like that. Just, I mean, considering the emotional state of these frontline workers and all that they had been doing to keep us safe and alive, and then to throw a cyber attack like that on top of it.
Even the fraud that was committed with all the COVID relief money, and the federal government, because they were trying to push this out so quickly, they kind of understood and knew the risk, and they took it on anyway. But that's taxpayers' dollars that is unrecoverable, and that's hard. It's a hard one to swallow.
Yeah, there's a special hell for these kinds of people. When I was at Cisco, we had to deal with hospice organizations that, the attackers knew that people were not looking at their identity and their accounts when they were in distress, like in hospice. And so they, back then we knew that they were particularly targeted. But the fact that they're doing it so pervasively for every major horrible event is going to be more and more of a problem as we go forward.
I sure hope there's a special place for them. For me, and I wanted to pick something because I figured you guys would scoop up some of the really good ones. I think one of the things that really sticks out for me from 2021 is this great resignation, as it's being called everywhere on LinkedIn, where all of these companies, and especially we see it a lot up here in Maine, we've got people from Boston and New York and California all moving here because they take their nice big San Francisco salaries that would get them a van in the parking lot, and they're able to work remotely, so they come up here and they buy a McMansion in Maine. But one of the things, because I am fascinated with insider threats, it's one of my favorite things to dig into and talk about, because it's not one of the ones that we're talking about all the time, like ransomware or social engineering. But the data loss prevention side of this great resignation, and how organizations should be or are really beginning to think about all of these employees that are resigning and going to a competitor or going to another job with different benefits, and the data that they're taking with them. So that's something that's been very top of mind for me lately. I feel like that needs to be maybe a Defendify topic coming up in one of our monthly campaigns. If that's something that resonates with you as well, drop a little line in the chat, see if I'm onto something with my thoughts on that side of it. So
you think about when you decommission a system, right? You want to make sure all of the data is wiped clean from it, and you want to make sure that there's nothing. It's the same thing with people, except you can't decommission that employee. You can't take away what they know in their brain from your trade secrets. It's an interesting hill to climb.
And not to mention a lot of them.
I do think that the importance of having a proper offboarding decommissioning process is often overlooked. And I believe this is true. I think that for example, the Colonial Pipeline, one of the credentials that was used in the attack was for an employee that hadn't worked there for some time. So, and that credential was still live, right? So that kind of thing is really important. And then, just culturally, I think it's hard, just speaking for a company where most of our staff is remote, when you're switching from employee A to employee B in this remote environment, it's not the same. Like you come down to your same desk with your same cup of coffee in your pajamas, and now you just work for someone. And I think the onboarding and or cultural indoctrination for employees switching companies is also an interesting problem.
I agree with you.
A lot of the times. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with you. I think that's why zero trust is becoming such an important, thought process for most companies. And I think that it was on the 18th that the federal government, by executive order, said that zero trust will be the policy du jour. And I think that, this idea about least privileges and really not giving people more than they need is going to be more and more important and finely tuned than it's ever been before.
Exactly. Gone are the days of trust but verify. We don't trust and we always verify. And especially with this great resignation, if somebody is, knowing that they're looking for an opportunity somewhere else, a lot of the times it's one thing to, shut off access as somebody is, walking out the door, but it's everything before that. It's data exfiltration. It's, IP, it's contacts, it's their, sales stuff or whatever role that they're in that they could very easily be pulling long before that actual resignation notice gets put in. So,
well, and then you have the BYOD situation. A lot of people are using personal cell phones, and they're, because companies are like, oh yeah, you can use your own phone, or you can use your own laptop or your own iPad or whatever. So you're in a situation where you can't recover those things because you don't own it as a business owner.
Absolutely. I've got a fun story to tell about that one as we go into our first kind of topic here, and the evolution in 2021 of ransomware. There's definitely a couple things that come to mind for me for this one. The drastic increase in ransomware as a service kits, we'll call them, that are available for purchase that anybody can be buying and launching. And I have been calling this the pyramid scheme or multi-level marketing franchise model for ransomware. Cryptocurrency certainly doesn't help our situations. We don't have to launder money with green dot cards anymore. The cryptocurrency makes things a lot easier. And one of the more notable pivots that I've definitely seen over the last year or so that sticks out in my mind is the double extortion component of no longer is it just like, I've locked everything up, and if you want the key to get access again, then you need to pay me some cryptocurrency. Now it's the data exfiltration, it's the lurking, it's if you don't pay me, I'm going to release all of this sensitive information on the dark web. It's one of those stuck between a rock and a hard place type things. But I've also in the last year seen an example of triple extortion. And I don't know if this resonates with any of our attendees or the panelists, but this was a medical professional, this one specific example that I encountered. And they took all of the patient records, and these were mental health records in a very large metropolitan area with some people who are very prominent figures. And not only was the ransom demand, pay me X amount of money in cryptocurrency to unlock all of your data and get me to delete all of this information off of my servers. If you don't, I'm going to release all of this information on the dark web, all these detailed psychological evaluations and, notes and everything else. And then they reached out to each of the patients individually and ransomed them as well. So I don't know if we want to maybe call this triple extortion, but the victims who had their data, stolen, basically.
With triple extortion, it can be that, or it can also be, the encrypting their data, the scraping their data and selling it, but also doing denial of service. There's a number of things that are happening, but it really goes to attack vectors. The more connected we are, and the more that the attacker can get, through one victim to others through the interconnectedness of things, the more we're going to see it go from triple to quadruple and so on. It's just being able to exploit to the maximum effect. And that's why it's so important that as far as cybersecurity policy, companies small and large, you've got your cyber posture is only as good as your weakest link. So those vendors that you deal with, your clients, your vendors, everybody who touches your network becomes a potential attack vector and vulnerability.
But also, Lori, the vendors often have some of your proprietary information. Multiple cases that we worked where the vendor was like let's say a global logistics supplier or reseller for a major manufacturer or something similar, they were hit with ransomware, and that major manufacturer's intellectual property, pricing agreements, things like that were part of the data that was being leaked, impacting their business negatively as well. So yeah, it's not just that they're an entry to the network, but they have some of your data, some of your data.
Yeah, and it goes beyond, when we're talking about vendors, for example, and supply chain, it goes beyond that first level, right? Because you've got the nth level supply chain, and even though it diminishes as it gets farther and farther away from, your organization, each step within that whole process becomes another attack vector. And I think that's a big problem with a lot of organizations. They're not looking beyond the scope of just their direct relationships, and they're not holding their vendors and suppliers to the standards of their own organization. They're not asking the right questions. And, and in addition to that, I always say, like, the weakest link is typically somewhere between the keyboard and the chair, right? So when you're not spending the time on educating, not just your security personnel, but everybody within the organization, also how they conduct themselves when they're working from home and allowing their kids, Xbox or whatever or Discord, right, to get onto the network that they're doing business on without any kind of separation. This just opens up this entire new world of opportunity for these business people. And when I say business people, I'm talking about the people going after the ransoms, because it's $1 billion business, right? I read something the other day where there are ransom organizations that are actually have better customer service than like an Amazon, because they want their reputation to be such that, yeah, we're going to help you and we're going to be good, so you just pay us and move on, right? So it has become $1 billion business. And the shift in ransomware is no longer where you're looking at, Iran trying to fund their nuclear program, right, through ransomware. This is business people around the world just funding business.
I just wanted to point out also that a lot of times when we think about suppliers, we think sort of downstream. And I just wanted to point out that it's often the other way around as well. And so you've got, for example, I just had a scenario like this. You've got let's say a medical provider, it's a clinic or something like that. They rely on a particular EMR vendor or something similar. We often look at it through the lens from the EMR vendor and go, that medical clinic is a risk to the EMR vendor. It's actually a lot of times the other way around. And so, in this particular scenario, the EMR vendor was the one that was negligent. The problem with that is that many of their smaller customers do not have the leverage to have those conversations with them. They don't have the credibility or leverage to sit down with their leadership team and say, you guys need to tighten your stuff up. And so I just want to, make it clear that it goes both ways. It's not the big guy worried about the little guys all the time. The little guys are just as at risk by the big guys, who's, quite frankly, their attack surface is bigger. So they're a bigger target, right?
Yeah, and I think Curtis and Antoinette they both make fabulous points. And, this incredible, this incredible growth of home offices, that Antoinette mentioned. I was at the dentist, and the dental hygienist was just making chit chat with me. And she was like, what do you do? And I said, I teach cybersecurity. She's like, oh, teach me something. I was like, okay. I said, what's the user ID and password to your home router? And she said, I don't know. I said, then I do, because it's admin and it's password. And there's just so many people. 50% of all people overestimate how well they secure their home office. And the research shows that more than 40% don't change the default passwords on their home router, on their Internet of Things devices. And that just becomes this great attack vector, because how many home workers have tried to use the VPN, all of a sudden some monster application from the home office doesn't work as nicely as it does in the office, but if I turn off that VPN, then all of a sudden it works so much better. Well, and it's also much more vulnerable to attacks. So this rise in home offices and this reluctance of people to go back to their home office, we're going to have to reconstruct a whole host of things so that things perform better using VPNs and other secure transmit, because securing the data in transit is going to be much more problematic with so many people working from home.
Yeah,
I was on a
just to
webinar.
stick with my theme of stating some of the less obvious problems. I want to draft off of what Lori said about work from home, and this is really important. It groups sense because frankly we're an intelligence company. Our products are digital risk solutions, but a lot of what we do is cyber intelligence, and some of it is human intelligence. So we're really paranoid about what we call OPSEC, for the audience, operational security. So think about this: when you're in an office, everybody works for the same company usually, or at least the people in the near proximity. So you can just talk about whatever you want. And if the person in the wall next to you, in the room next to you can hear you, it's not that really big of a deal. If you work at home, or you work like where I'm at right now, I'm in a hotel. If I talk about the wrong things too loudly, they hear me. When COVID first started, I remembered I was sitting in my home office in Arlington, Virginia, and I had the window open, and there was a guy who took a conference call for work in the courtyard. And I knew so much about his business. 45 minutes later, it was actually a serious security violation for that to have occurred. And so one of the things I think that is not happening with companies that have their remote workers is they're not talking about stuff like that. They're not talking about, hey, you know what? It's not a great idea to leave the documents laying in the passenger seat of your car. It's not a great idea to speak loudly in a multi-tenant unit. Those sorts of things. They do make a difference.
Absolutely. The admin Wi-Fi router password, I was on another webinar, and one of the women was from Microsoft, and she said that they did a study of IoT passwords over 45 days, and 20 million times admin was used. Crazy, in 45 days.
I can tell you right now, there are devices in the physical security industry where the root account is defaulted to admin and you can't change it. So we want to talk about, security and code, and I'm sure we're going to get to that at some point, but that you can't change it. So 50% of the credentials is already known by everybody in the world. So all I have to do now is guess the password. Sorry.
Yep. I know some of the vendors got better and did end up switching that relatively recently. We had a conversation about that in the system integration community. On the ransomware side of things, I know a lot of organizations are not even really getting the ransom and the availability side of their security hacked, I guess we'll say. They're not having their files encrypted. They're just seeing the data exfiltration and then the ransom demand to not release it on the dark web. Do you think that's something that's, because that's kind of, going through and encrypting a lot of the files, that's a major indicator that they're having a compromise. Do you think we're going to see less of that in 2022, or do you think they're going to continue to, encrypt all of the files?
Curtis, I think they're just different business models. I think we're going to see a healthy dose of both.
I was just going to say the same exact thing. It's a business, right? It's working for them. So if that model works, they're going to continue to do it. I personally think we're going to see new iterations and new creativity on how they can take this one thing and grow it. And, Lori said, it's just going to get more and more.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, cyber insurance is going up, 300%. It's because the risk is going up 300%.
Yes, and that is a very good, perfect lead-in, Lori, in the hardening of the cybersecurity market. This has been one of the biggest things recently that has been driving people to either look into or look back into Defendify and some additional cybersecurity solutions is this hardening of the cybersecurity insurance market. We talked about it ad nauseum over the course of November, and did a lot of thought leadership and conversation just based on what we heard from our own Defendify customers. So, no longer is it what's the size of your organization? What's your annual revenue? How many employees do you have? How many locations do you have? Okay, here's your policy. Now it's getting a lot more complicated to either initially get your standalone cybersecurity policy or to renew. We're seeing a lot of organizations that had the basic, like how big are you conversation, and now they're getting slapped with a 17-tab spreadsheet about their entire cyber posture. They're being told that they're either just straight up uninsurable, or that they need to implement some additional measures in order to maintain their current coverage or just obtain coverage to begin with. So this has been a major thing that we're seeing out there in the industry. Do you all think that there should be minimum requirements for cybersecurity insurance?
I mean, I think this is just a business. It's a private industry, right? So it's a business thing. I actually think it's a positive thing. But even with those things, the policies can be pretty unaffordable.
Yeah, I think also, people don't do things unless they're forced to do it, right? Unless you hit them in the pocket, and that's typically how people are motivated. I think the insurance company underestimated cyber risk in the beginning, and they got hurt pretty badly. A lot of insurance companies won't even hold cyber policies. Similar to the way like flood insurance, a lot of companies won't even do flood insurance anymore because they had such a massive onslaught of hurricanes, right? So organizations that do have policies or are renewed, I think even then though, they're not educated as to what the policies do cover. There's so many different forms of risk and forms of breaches where, you may be covered for your own stuff, but if your breach causes a third party to have exposure, you may or may not be covered. And something I talk about a lot with my clients is, have you read the policy? Do you understand the controls that you're supposed to have in place? Do you have those controls in place? Can you document the maturity? Because if you just check the box, compliance does not mean that you're secure. The insurance company might very well just deny the claim. So it's very sophisticated.
Also on that, the thing I instruct a lot of folks when we're talking about ransomware preparedness and prevention is, if you have a policy, understanding in the event of an incident, many of the policies dictate on how you should respond and whom you should call in which order and there's usually time bounds on those things. And if you don't understand that, the day that the incident occurs is a bad time to try to read the fine print.
Yeah, and when you do, and I also encourage people when they're doing their incident response plan or they're doing an incident response exercise to have representation from your insurance company that's familiar with your policy to help you go navigate what those steps are. Great point, Curtis. Absolutely.
But, going back to Curtis's point about, hurting the small business, I had a cybersecurity consulting business, and I had to get cybersecurity insurance to do business with the Department of Defense. And, and it was expensive then. So add 300%, it starts pricing that small business, out of the market. So kind of to Antoinette's point, I think that more and more we're going to have to look at the federal government looking at cyber insurance like flood insurance, where the small business can get affordable coverage and be backed by the federal government. It's going to be the only way to keep small businesses competitive in this market.
Lori, what do you think should be the minimum cybersecurity requirements in order to get a cyber insurance policy?
That's hard to say because it's so dependent on what is the sector that you do business with. If you do business with defense, intelligence, financial sector, it's going to be much higher. But at the same time, if you do business with K through 12 and education, they're often seen as soft targets. So a lot of it's going to be that the cybersecurity insurance companies are going to take a look at how much is your sector targeted? How much do you have in terms of protection and experience and expertise backing you? And what are you doing for control measures? And that's why that spreadsheet starts getting wider and wider. So it really depends on your market, the size of your risk, the size of your company, the investment you've made in security, and the investment you've made in third-party vendors if they're providing security. I mean, SolarWinds is such a great example of, I thought they had my back and they were the attack vector.
Absolutely. It's almost like you're just leading right into all of these for me. It's beautiful. Just like, whoo, layup.
Lori, did you hack in and get ahead of this?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I will not
Maybe
leave my
here,
secrets out.
I think you need this. Yeah, third-party risk was a major theme over the last year. Just, off the top of the head, SolarWinds has already been talked about. Kaseya for anyone who's in the managed service provider industry. I mean, Log4j, Log4Shell. All right, hold on. I'm gonna pass this out to the panel. Is it Log4j or Log4j? Which one are we going with?
Hey.
4J.
All right, and also GIF or GIF?
GIF. Are we gonna fight?
I'm not. My son's in college. He's at Fordham, and we had a whole family dispute over GIF or GIF. So we're just.
I think maybe I don't know, Antoinette, if you can get in on this one. Is it Etsy or ETC in the Unix file system?
ETC.
I will change the way that I pronounce GIF or GIF based on who I am talking to. So if I know that I have like a, Wikipedia purist friend on the line, then I will make sure that I call it GIF, which is purely peanut butter in my opinion, but that's okay. Apparently the creator of these goes with GIF, but if it's my everyday layman, then I will definitely go with.
Well, is it CISO, CISO, CISO,
right.
CISO? We can do this all day. We can do this all day.
Exactly. All right. So we're gonna roll with Log4j on this one, even though there's a bunch of stuff out there about Log4j, but a lot of third-party risk, technology, supply chain, all of these types of vulnerabilities that are coming out in the news. So much so that we have the Biden administration with the software bill of materials, a lot more requests, and I know we've seen this just on the Defendify side of things for some more vendor transparency. How do you guys feel about that?
Coming from the manufacturing world, the software bill of material is a very sensitive subject for me. I think that transparency is absolutely important. That's like the root of security and being secure. But I also feel like, that's the secret sauce for a lot of organizations. And so there has to be a line, right? There has to be parameters by which we can be transparent without expecting businesses to give away their source code completely, right? Because then where's the competition? Where it's a tough subject. It's a tough subject that requires debate, and people need to talk about it. But to just expect businesses to give away their secret sauce it's a tall ask. I'd love to defer to my colleagues and see what everybody else thinks.
I like how nobody wants to touch it.
Well, yeah, I think the fact that we're both backing off speaks volumes. It's it's the tension between proprietary interest and the interest of national security. It's no different than the California authorities trying to get Apple to unlock somebody's phone. These become proprietary interests of the company, and unless Congress decides to legislate differently, it's going to be very difficult for them to enforce those kinds of levels of transparency. It's also going to put us at risk for espionage for other nations as well, because that are not as equally transparent. And we don't want to give the keys to our crown jewels from an intellectual property over to the terrorist nation state du jour, whether it's Iran or China or whomever. So there's a lot involved with this, and I think it's going to take some real heavyweight congressional bipartisan work to make that come to fruition. And given the circumstances in Congress today, I don't see that happening. That's not a thing.
Hold on, you got the crystal ball, Shanna.
Lord, let's see. Oh, all right. Magic 8-Ball says the answer is yes.
I just wanted to add on to that to say that, and I don't want to oversimplify it, so feel free to call me out, Antoinette, but I do think there are precedents for this sort of thing. I mean, there are there are ways that make the drugs we use safe. There are ways that make the food we eat safe. We have processes for these things that are very similar in parallel. I think there is a way to solve this that protects intellectual property. Unfortunately, like we just discussed about, a lot of that lies in the hands of the federal government to solve, and that's the real challenge.
I agree. I think you're right. I think that there's a way to be able to talk about what tools or things are being used within software without giving the actual source code, right? But I don't know if that's even enough, right? Like just having the bill of materials per se, is that even enough? Because you can't tell if something's been embedded into that. So then it's almost a smoke and mirrors situation. But Lori, as you mentioned, nation states, I'm thinking China. So China has created this policy that if you want to do business in China, you have to divulge whatever product it is that you're selling, services that you're selling, you have to divulge that IP to the government. You have to, you have to basically hand over the keys to the castle. So many companies are willing to do that because the Chinese market is so big.
Yeah, but I also think that, for example, what they perhaps give China and produce in China is different than what they produce for the rest of the world.
That is true.
It's kind of interesting. They're trying to stand up that cyber safety board, like it's kind of like the transportation safety board. So if there's a big incident, they'll swoop down and be able to figure out, the forensics of all of that and be able to keep us safer. And they can't even stand that up to and that was, an executive edict recently. So, if they're not going to look at, if they're not going to look at, major incidents in hindsight, I can't see what they're going to do for foresight. It's just me.
I would have to agree.
I mean, so she just did it again. So I was sitting here going, there isn't enough talent to deal with what we have right now. Never mind stand up new organizations.
Exactly. So what do you think can happen in 2022 to help close this talent gap?
I just wanted to connect the two that we were just talking about to this slide, and that was I don't know if you knew this, Lori and Antoinette, but the National Guard has a cyber response team per state.
Yep.
And I know some of these people, and this ties into the talent gap. A lot of these people were sort of just dumped into this role, and their main focus is if like municipalities or schools in the state get hit, that they're one of the first responders. But these first responders haven't really been trained. And so, we were involved in a number of cases where they called us up and said, "We need your help." And so, the national response system is sort of they're starting to build these ideas out. But again, the talent gap is so big, and the need to do the proper knowledge transfer is not being addressed.
Well, and let's start off with cybersecurity is the least diverse field, that, we presently have, that we have a gap of about 500,000 jobs right now in the United States, according to cyberseek.org. We've got 1 million workers, but there's almost 500,000 open jobs. And even in Maine, there's over 700 open jobs. But we're not seeing the number of women we should be seeing. We're not seeing minority students. And we've got to get these underrepresented populations in, because there's a ton of talent that we're losing because we're not bringing in, this other 50%.
Well, because they're all making their money on TikTok. Come on now.
That's right.
No, I think that, when we started this conversation, we were talking about our backgrounds. Lori and I have an affinity to educating the next generation. We have to start them young. We have to get into the K through 12 environment. And a lot of people are like, no, we'll get into the high schools. No, we need to get into the K through 12. And I have done sessions for 4th and 5th graders, where 5th grade in underserved communities, actually, where little 5th grade and 4th grade girls are coming up to me saying, this is so cool. How do I get into this? And how did you get into it? Right. So representation matters. And I think that when we demystify these types of technology careers to younger people, and make sure that young girls know that it's more than just the TikTok dances and things like that. I think that we can start to close that gap, but there's nothing that we're gonna, I think, be able to do in 2022. I think we're right now, we're just planting seeds, but we have got to do a better job at exposing young people. My niece is in 11th grade and she's in the JROTC. It's actually for Army in Florida, and she is part of their Cyber Patriots program. And she called me up in the beginning of the semester, in the beginning of the school year, and she told me that she was involved with the Cyber Patriot program. And she said she never would have done it if I wasn't in cybersecurity. She wouldn't have even known what that meant. And now they're doing competitions, and she wants to intern for me, and she's looking at colleges, and we're looking at scholarships for her and all these things. The only reason why she's doing this, she had somebody to look up to say, oh, wow, I could do that too. And she's really good. Like, women are really good problem solvers, right? And that's not to discount men in the industry, but women think critically different than men. So we need both. We need a bigger pool of talent because we need both ways of thinking. Some of those soft skills we were talking about earlier as well.
Lori knows a thing or two about soft skills in cybersecurity.
I mean, I just did a lot of research, and folks at Defendify were very, very helpful in that effort. And, and the employers are, the skills, the technical skills, what I found was that the technical skills get you the interview, but it's the non-technical skills, the ability to present, to communicate well, those get you over the finish line and get you the job. And, one of the things we're doing with the Cybersecurity Ambassadors, which is a program that, I've been very lucky that great companies like GWI and the Office of Securities in Maine and others have provided me bits of funding. We just got a grant from the Maine Technical Institute to have underrepresented students be interns with cybersecurity ambassadors, and they're going out to the community and providing vulnerable populations, older adults, K through 12, veterans, workshops in phishing, identity, everyday cyber safety, social media safety, and they're great representatives for the PATHS program, the K through 12, and we just just trying to do as much as we can, at least, at USM, getting those underrepresented populations into programs that support them. They see people who look like them. And we just have to do more of that. So that's what it's going to take to bridge the gap.
Yeah. So I want to touch on, let's see if I can touch on all these things. One, the soft skills. I think one of the things that we're technical folks, and myself included, are often bad at is the explaining in normal words the context, and specifically the why. People, you can tell them to do something, but if they understand the why, they really understand the why, they're more likely to do it. And so the soft skills are hard. The other thing, I love what you're doing, Lori, and we actually have Lori and I have a mutual friend who's helping me with the project. So when I started doing the ransomware cases and they started turning into these small business ones, I recognized a problem. And when I was at DEF CON, when I got off the stage, we were doing a panel on ransomware, of course, it's the topic. When I got off the stage, I kind of said to the crowd that came around me, I said, hey guys, don't wait on the government to solve this. You're all really smart people. There's a list of 3 to 5 very simple cyber hygiene things that every small business can do to protect themselves. Go home to your communities, volunteer at your chamber of commerce, volunteer at your local businesses, and help these people make a change. And so that I wasn't a hypocrite, I had been doing this. I've been, when I do my business trips, I would volunteer at chambers of commerce, at associations, at tech incubators, at universities to teach small businesses. It's a workshop. I actually do demos. I show them how to implement the software. I walk them through all of this. And so I think the thing I want to put out there for everybody here who are cyber professionals is you by yourself can make an impact. You don't have to wait for someone to come save the day. Like, you can actually go, if you have spare time, volunteer. And you use the word patriot, which I really love. I made this argument one time, I was for another talk, that frankly, good cyber hygiene as an individual or a small business is patriotism. And the logic behind that is if we can all agree that small to medium business collectively in the United States could be considered critical infrastructure because, well, frankly, it makes up half the economy and more than half the jobs, right? So if we understand that the technology is moving so fast that most of these companies, it's unreasonable to these small businesses, it's unreasonable to expect them to understand and mitigate the risk associated with the technology. They have to adopt to be competitive. Then there's the gap, right? We have to solve that gap. If we also understand where most of the attacks are emanating from and where most of the money is going, then you could say that it's a national security issue and it's a critical infrastructure issue, and it would be your responsibility as a citizen to care about it. And if the business themselves don't understand why, the other cyber professionals like us need to step up and help them understand why, and sometimes actually help them make the change.
I love the education side of things. That is precisely why I got into this industry after sending a very, very, very large wire to a cyber attacker as a real estate paralegal. I attended one of our co-founder Rob's presentations about cybersecurity awareness, and I just had one of those, you know, oh my goodness moments where I was like, whatever this guy's doing, I want to be a part of it. So nobody ever feels that feeling where everything up here drops all the way down through everything down there. And that's kind of the goal here. We're getting down to the end of time here. I thought on the IoT, OT convergence side of things, anybody think we're going to see something like this anytime soon?
Wait, I watched one of those home shows where they're like renovating somebody's thing, and in the show it said, Alexa, have the Delta faucet dispense 1 cup of water, and then the faucet dispenses 1 full cup of water. I do not have a smart home. I refuse to have a smart home. And I just was like, every part and fiber of my being cringed, because I was like, what is happening right now? You can tell your faucet how much water to dispense, which means you can shut your faucet permanently if somebody wanted to, right? Like, that's all I have to say.
I think this is the smartest thing in my house right now. Yeah, I know, Antoinette, you had talked about this in kind of your intro and the convergence and your career path of how you got here. So, and we also talked a lot about the attacks on all of our, you know, critical infrastructure and industrial control side of things. So I don't think we're quite at the, you know, toaster being ransomed, but I'm sure we're probably right around the corner from it, if any, you know.
But I think we got so used to these devices that we forget that the attack vector. I have a real short anecdote. I lived in the DC area, and I was at a government event between the US and some other large country, and it was a formal event. There was probably 400 people in the room. Now, it was unclassified. There was no, but you know, it's people in uniform, and we're talking about government things. And on the podium, one of the gentlemen was talking, and he said, Syria, like the country. And 400 iPhones answered him around the Siri. So Siri thought, they said Siri, all the phones went off, and there was, some people had an uncomfortable laugh. Most of us got chills.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to everybody on this webinar whose phone just responded as well.
That's right. I'm sorry, please.
I can tell you 5 years ago when I got the notice in the mail that my power supplier was going with the smart sensors to put on my home, I was furious. And I asked for specifics on how they're securing them, and I got no answer. And I had no choice. So, you know, that's frustrating, right?
Mm-hmm.
I totally understand. I got in a fight with my internet provider about, you know, first of all, not using their gateway, but also my choice of modem and router, and they were not happy with me, and I was not happy with them. And 4 supervisors later, we got it resolved. So I totally understand. 2022, what do you think the hotline and buzzword and solution of the year is going to be like? What are we going to see unfold this year?
I find it interesting that, you know, in 2019, zero trust was this like mystical unicorn that nobody was able to achieve. And now it's just become kind of the norm and the basis of all security architecture. But something that's really interesting, and I'm seeing it more and more in the devices that I'm using right now, is this whole passwordless philosophy, where instead of using username and credentials and passwords, we're using tokens or, you know, authenticator apps or something else where it changes every single time you use the device. I think it's fascinating, and I think that we might see more of that.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think that the identity authentication market is going to make a big leap. And you're seeing it in the venture capital markets. and the private equity markets. Those companies are commanding pretty large valuations at the moment, just like the zero trust companies did in 2019 and early 2020, right? So
speaking of unicorns,
yeah, it's heading in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunately there's going to be a lot of black unicorns. There's going to be more criminals as a service getting more capability and more expansion and more emboldened. And so that will be interesting to see as that evolves and what we do to respond to it.
it's equal parts fascinating and terrifying, the pivots that they make, and the new attack vectors. I think what is kind of the acronym soup for a lot of the calls that we have here at Defendify right now is the SIEM or SIM, depending on who you are, SOC as a service, MDR, EDR, XDR, elemental PDR, like all those different services and the differences, but definitely the emergence of Gartner's newest DR category of the XDR, extended detection and response, just because of the amount of telemetry required and all the different signals and all of the sources that we need to be ingesting and analyzing, and the fact that there is no one single attack vector that's being utilized. All of these attacks are just spread across so many different systems and components and technology and people and external, internal, you name it. There's just everything going on everywhere. And I've used the analogy before that trying to manage all of that is like trying to do it through like the little, Curtis, you might appreciate this, like through the little peephole in your hotel room door, like kind of trying to look side to side and not really being able to see very much. And that's kind of how we're managing our security postures. So we need eyes on everything, full eyes, without constant upsell pitches to add more modules for this and to see that and to bring this in. And
more dashboards.
More dashboards, more alerts.
I want to add one more thing because I know we're running late, but because nobody's rolled their eyes yet, so let's do that now. The metaverse. So thanks. I still do, but it's a real thing. We've done some research as an intelligence company to show that some of the cyber criminal activity that has been, usually relegated to dark web forums has the possibility and has moved into some of these meta spaces, which are harder to crack and to catalog. What typically happens with new technology stacks like this, or paradigm shifts like this, is that the bad guys recognize before everyone else that there's a huge opportunity for fraud and to operate criminal enterprises. It's still happening with ransomware, where there are so many intermediary fraud companies that act as ransomware response companies. I'm doing a research with a management consulting company around, are companies ransomwaring themselves to liquidate capital, things like that.
I don't doubt it. So we had somebody saying, how do we get in touch with all of you wonderful speakers? So we dropped Antoinette and Curtis dropped their information down into the chat. So if you want to connect with these brilliant minds that I was fortunate enough to be joined by today, you can look them up on social media. If you need any of the services of their company, or you want to send any of your brilliant little students over to Lori for the best education and best career path they could possibly ever ask for, then we've got all their details down below. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for dropping all that in there. I know we ran over a little bit on time. We still have a majority of people that are still on here. So if you have any questions, I don't know if any of our panelists have to jump off, but if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop those down into the chat or the Q&A. But for those of you who hung around for the whole thing, I think we made some really fun predictions. We didn't even need any of the tarot cards or the crystals or anything like that to figure out what's in store. And I love the fact that this webinar wasn't just a whole bunch of, what are we going to see in 2022? More of the same of 2021. We know that. We know that. So hopefully we can get ahead of all the crazy things that have been going on in the cyber landscape, and If you have any other ideas or topics or things that you want to see us talk about or you want to learn more about, please feel free to send them over to us. You can shoot us an email, hello@defendify.com. You can find any of us on social media or schedule time to chat. So thank you to all three of you for joining me. I always learn so much every time I get to talk to all of the panelists. And Curtis, good luck with your Pirate Con or whatever it was that I wrote down somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully I won't get pushed overboard.
You're gonna walk the plank. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, stay safe.
Thanks
you.
for
Bye,
having us.
everybody.
Yep,
Thank
my pleasure.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.